Hello, everybody. Thank you, Beyond the Stocks listeners. So we have an amazing episode for you today. We've got James Keys. He's a phenomenal guest that we're excited to share some time with this morning. So we're fortunate to be able to chat with you today, Jim. So thanks again. Just going to do a quick intro here. So James Keys is a global business leader, philanthropist, speaker, artist, musician, commercial pilot, and pretty much a modern Renaissance man. He's the former CEO of two Fortune 500 companies, that's 7-Eleven and Blockbuster, and his other business interests cover a broad range of alternative industries and assets such as retail, consumer products, technology, new space, energy, and advanced nuclear. He sits on several public company boards and serves as an advisor to foundations and investment firms. And if I were to guess, Jim, you're probably most proud of your philanthropic initiatives, like serving on the National Board of Governors for the American Red Cross, being the former chairman of the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, or serving on the boards for organizations like the University of Texas Medical School, the Cooper Institute, Dallas Performing Arts Center, Columbia Business School, and the College of the Holy Cross.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm not done yet here, Pedro. Jim's also the founding director of the Dallas Education Foundation, and as we're aware, Pedro, he established the Education is Freedom Foundation over 20 years ago. So really, Jim, you're a personification of the American dream. So we're really pleased to have you here and very excited to discuss your book as well, Education is Freedom, same name as the organization you founded. So, thanks again for joining us, and let's get right into it. Maybe let our listeners know a little bit about you, Jim.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. It's great to join you this morning. I don't know. After that bio, I'm not sure what else I can add. It sounds like I've been a busy guy, but the reality is I'm just old. You know, when you have that many years under your belt, you get to do a lot of stuff. So.
Well, you know, having had the opportunity to chat with you previously and then read your book, the main thing that I took away is that with some effort and discipline, anything is possible. That's what I took away from you. So tell us your thoughts on that. What do you think was the catalyst for you to become somebody who was so committed to really initially your education, then followed by education in general for the wider American public?
Yeah, it was really the motivation for the book, and the title says it all, because I have really lived a life way beyond my expectations, or certainly anyone's expectations of me. Given the way I grew up, I came from a very much underprivileged background. I wasn't one of those kids that was going to aspire to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, because I couldn't even spell Fortune 500. I mean, it was so far out of my comprehension back in the day. But what I discovered is that I found the key to success very early on, whether it was success in school or success in the corporate world or just success in life, came down to learning. And the more I learned, the more I could do. And I'm still learning today. And every time I learn something new, I get another element of my life that's richer and more interesting. And I get a whole new set of adventures that open up for me. So my mission with this book, and the mission I've been on really for the last few years, is to share with everyone this, call it the roadmap to freedom, if you will, the ability to learn and overcome those natural barriers that each of us have, that are generally self-imposed, that keep us from enjoying everything life has to offer.
Yeah, thank you for that. definitely resonates for me personally. I was mired in a, dare I say, a dead end job for a little over a decade, actually, before something clicked in me and I realized that I wasn't trapped there. It was a trap of my own device, like that I created in my brain. So what you said really hit me there. And I
Yeah,
think,
I talk in the book about, different forms of bondage, if you will, that there is you could be in prison, and that's one form of imprisonment or bondage, and that's imposed on the outside, but we have our own prisons that we put ourselves in, just
Right.
with the bondage that we have in our mind, that this belief that there's something we can't do, or someone won't let us do something, and it's just not true. It's a big lie. So
indeed,
yeah, if you can grow the confidence and overcome that fear of breaking those chains that limit you, virtually anybody can do anything they want to do or they
yeah.
aspire to do.
That's very true. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have really a variety of poignant vignettes throughout the book, but one extreme example of the bondage of the mind being so much greater than any sort of physical trap that we could be in is your examples of Nelson Mandela, right? He's
Yeah.
literally imprisoned, but was able to accomplish so much with virtually no resources over decades in prison. So really phenomenal example. An extreme example, we as regular people don't have to go to that extent, but it really shows you the power of, if you free your mind, there's just so much that that you can do.
Yeah, it's true. And it's interesting because I talk a lot to people who have children, and they say, how do I get my children to think this way? Because they don't have the kind of adversity that Nelson Mandela had, or that you had, Jim, growing up. Maybe they're a little bit overprivileged, and how do you get them to realize that they too can do anything they want to do? And what I remind everybody of is adversity comes in all kinds of shapes and sizes. And Nelson Mandela had far worse adversity than me. I grew up poor. I wasn't in jail for 20 plus years.
Mm.
But even that example, for him to not let them imprison his mind, he can
Mhm.
imprison his body, imprison him physically. But he was accused one time. It was one of the favorite stories that I put in the book. He was accused of turning the prison into a school by a warden who came in and saw him and all his peers studying law. And the warden was all upset, and he threw the books on the ground. He said, "You guys have turned this prison into a school." And it's
Mm.
such a beautiful metaphor for for life, because why can't any of us take whatever adversity we have, because we all have adversity. Maybe you were bullied in school, maybe you've got a bad boss, I mean, various degrees, and not let that adversity cause you to be a prisoner in your own mind, to
Hmm.
be able to free your mind to say, I'll get through this. I'm not going to let this determine who I am or what I am. And that's what Nelson Mandela did. That's what I was able to do. And that's what I'm hoping to help others be able to accomplish.
Yeah, very powerful comments there. Thank you, Pedro. Right, you societally imposed, but you uh, have figured out a way to challenge your children, right, to make sure that they grow up in a disciplined way. You do that through sport.
Yeah. I mean, definitely sports. One thing that I do resonate is that I've grew up poor from the Bronx, and then picked myself up. And you know one of the things that I had in the past was imposter syndrome because of where I came from. So, and then I teach my kids now, it's like, listen, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, you can actually accomplish this. Is your own self that would stop, limit yourself, right? So my kids in jiu-jitsu, and they are a bunch of beasts, all three of them. So it's amazing. So I love what you're teaching, because it's needed, especially for me, like in people that came from from urban areas that don't have that mentorship. So it's really important. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how you grow up poor, urban poor, rural poor, poor is poor.
yeah.
And but but the problem is not the poverty. The problem is that that perception that others impose on you that success is not for you. You're poor. Who do you think you are? You're in the Bronx.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I had the same thing. Success is not for you. You're in a factory town. That's what we do here. Just get over it and know your place. You're not supposed to go to some fancy college. You're supposed to work in the factory like your dad did, and just shut up and be happy with it. it's just such a lie.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
I don't know, Jim, this is a quick side note. I don't know if you've ever read Keith Ferrazzi's book, Never Eat Alone, but I was very struck by how many similarities there are in both your lives. I feel like it'd be phenomenal if you two met, because you lived in kind of parallel universes to achieve phenomenal things.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't met him, and yeah, that would be interesting. It's funny. There's now that I've put the book out, I've found so many people that have grown up under, excuse me, such extraordinarily difficult circumstances and turned them into success. And the irony is, your chances of success may be higher if you have had adversity than if you had an easy ride. And it's so counterintuitive, and it's so counter narrative that you have to be born with advantage to have success. Adversity growing up gives you a kind of strength that I find is a superpower in so many ways. If you let it be, if you nurture it.
Yeah. And so along those lines, it's really the combination of having that adversity, but also at some point you have to be exposed to a culture of turning that into a positive, right? And maybe the lack of that really is the issue. Is not adversity or lack of adversity, but having a culture of overcoming.
It is, and it's not. It's hard to say you need the culture, because it's up to each of us. Each of us has the ability to manage this ourselves, but it's harder on your own. Having a mentor, having someone you can look to and see, well, they did it. I mean, in a crazy way, I looked at the guys that landed on the moon, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, right? And the way I was inspired by them is they were ordinary guys, but they were doing extraordinary things. And I linked their, they didn't grow up in rich families. They were military kids who grew up relatively in very modest means, but they were able to do what they did because of their knowledge, their skills. They learned to be astronauts, and they learned to be successful. And so that was sort of the quiet motivation that I had. If they can do it, I can do it. Maybe I can walk on the moon one day.
Yeah.
Still
Yeah. I do have a question. So it's just for the audience to know, what was the pivoting point in your life where you said, knowing that, having that background that you come from, to accomplishing all this amazing things and having this great success, what was the pivot point to say, I have the desire, I'm able to break through these chains, this is what I know I can do this?
I wish I could pinpoint it, but I think there are small victories along the way. And my first job, McDonald's, I'm flipping burgers like anybody else, right? But I needed that job so badly because I knew that if I was going to go to school, I needed to make money. And I ended up looking around and saying, well, nobody else is working that hard. They're just putting in the minimum amount of effort to get by and get a payroll, a paycheck. I'm going to work twice as hard. And I literally took it so seriously that I wanted to be the best grill guy. Or if I had to go clean the lot, I would run to clean a quarter mile each way. And that so impressed the people I was working with that I ended up becoming a shift manager. And I was like 16 years old. And they entrusted me with my own shift. And why? Because I showed a level of commitment and seriousness about that role that my peers weren't showing. So that was one of those small, successes along the way whether it was being named captain of the baseball team. Again, was I a better baseball player than anybody else? No, but I outworked everybody on the team on the field. The coach would tell us to run laps. I was determined to be at the front of the pack, not because I was fastest, but because I knew I needed to. If I was going to succeed, I had to work a little harder than everybody else. And when they made me captain of the baseball team, all of a sudden it was like, wait, this works. It was positive reinforcement. So every step along the way, whether it was academic, in sports, in my first job, and then ultimately in my professional life, I had these little markers that said, you can do this. It doesn't matter who you are. As long as you're willing to put the time in and the effort in, you can do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if I may, I'd like to shift gears a little bit because you kept bringing up your business stories, weaving them into the overall narrative within your Education is Freedom book, and being a business and investing nerd, I really wanted to dive a little further into 7-Eleven. So
Sure.
you went through an LBO there, and if I understood correctly, that was a ownership led buyout, correct?
It was.
And I know the company had some leverage issues following that presented tremendous challenges to you as the leader of that organization. So what do you think went wrong there, and what if you could revise history, what would have been the right way to move forward there to prevent the corporate takeover? Maybe do execute some sort of management buyout, but do it without hurting the company as much.
Yeah, so many lessons, both in 7-Eleven and in Blockbuster. That's why I tried to weave a lot of them into the book, because these lessons are so valuable for either entrepreneurs or people within the corporate world to be able to learn from history and learn from others' mistakes, candidly. So what happened with 7-Eleven? Well, it was a victim of its own success. 7-Eleven started very modestly in the 60s and 70s, grew like crazy during the 80s, and they got to be so big, and this happens, I call it big company disease, that inertia creeped in. And there is a natural resistance to change that happens in every organization when it gets big. And it comes from humans basically being the people who are running these companies, and humans have a natural resistance to change, right? Yes. And we're our insecurities, our imposter syndrome, whatever it is, creeps in. Corporate politics creeps in, and we think, well, what got us to where we are today will keep working, but it doesn't necessarily keep working, right? The same skills that got you to where you are aren't going to get you to the next level potentially. And so that happened to 7-Eleven. We had 10 years of same-store sales declines when the company tried to take itself private in 1987. And I joined the company, didn't realize, I thought, wow, this is great, because from the outside looking in, it looked like it was wildly successful. New York Stock Exchange company, growing like crazy. The top line was growing, but the bottom line was suffering, and same-store performance was getting worse and worse and worse. The leverage buyout that happened in 1987 was thought to be the solution. And the lesson there is a financial restructuring doesn't fix a broken corporate model. It can sometimes help. It can sometimes buy you a little time, but it can't fix a model that isn't working. And that was what we were missing at the time. The bankers didn't really care. They were trying to, get a deal done.
Get their fees.
Get their fees. So they're encouraging the team. They're saying, you can do this. Just put, I know for this model to work, you need a 6-7% sales increase. You can do that. So we went from 10 years of same store declines to a projected 7% same store sales increase, which was pie in the sky. There's no way that was going to happen because there wasn't a substantive plan behind that ability to drive sales. So when they did the LBO, then it became double jeopardy, because as they were trying to sell the deal and fund the debt for the company, the market collapsed This happened to be twice in my career. This was Black
Yeah.
Monday in 1987. The market collapsed. Instead of backing off and pulling the deal and saying, we'll come back another day, they proceeded to fund at 17% interest rate, $4 billion, and with a model that really didn't make any sense. So in hindsight, and hindsight's always 2020, they should not have proceeded with that deal. They should have first fixed the business model, and they would have been fine. But they really had that inertia was very badly. As a new employee to 7-Eleven at the time, I saw the resistance to change. I saw people dug in, and candidly, the best thing that could have happened to 7-Eleven was the ultimate restructuring of the company. They faced a bankruptcy, and it took that crisis then to force 7-Eleven to rethink its business model. And that's what caused then 10 years of same-store sales increases after that catastrophic meltdown.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. One question, you said revenue was going up even as same-store sales was declining. So how did you manage that? Were you just opening up new stores?
Yeah, revenue increases can mask a lot of sins. And that's why you see a lot of companies just grow for the sake of growth, because they're basically, by continuing to acquire, build, as long as they can get access to capital, they can hide the fact that their core business is suffering and struggling. And they don't have the urgency to fix that because they're showing growth and they're being rewarded for that growth. Now, sometimes it works. If you're Amazon and you can, not make money for 10 years and the street allows you to do that while you're building sales, that works. If you're a more traditional company and you're trying to grow through acquisition and then finally you run out of people to acquire, and your business model is exposed as flawed, and then the whole house of cards collapses, that can not be a good thing.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you very much for sharing those insights there. Moving on to Blockbuster. So yet another slew of really valuable vignettes that you kind of sprinkled throughout your book with respect to Blockbuster. But in an alternate universe, what might have changed the course of history really to cause Blockbuster to leverage the technology, which you pointed out already existed at Blockbuster to do the technical things that Netflix was doing, but something happened, right? Where the winds of history pushed that towards Netflix and not to Blockbuster. So can you expand on that, how that came to be?
Sure. I'll give you three things that could have, and if I had to do over again, would have changed. Number one, day one when I arrived at Blockbuster, it wasn't to join the company. I had already had a job. I was trying to buy Blockbuster. The reason I was trying to buy it after a successful run at 7-Eleven, I had a lot of private equity and investors lined up to say, hey, let's go buy something together. And Blockbuster was a good target. Why? Because clearly a transformation was needed, a business transformation needed, and a very difficult and expensive business transformation like the shift from stores to digital is sometimes much easier to accomplish in a private entity versus a public entity.
Absolutely.
Because they're messy. You've got store closures, you've got leases to get rid of, they're just messy. And you're going to have some period of time of negative EBITDA while you're investing in a new business and either fixing or disposing of the old. So the easiest solution is take the company private, buy it, fix it, and then reemerge as a public company. Had we done that in 2007, when I joined the company, we would have refinanced the company at about 6% interest rate, which was pretty much what the cost of money was at the time. We would have refinanced $1 billion of debt on the balance sheet, taken the company private, at about a 6% rate of interest, but with a longer term. So in other words, we wouldn't have had to pay that note back for at least 5 years, maybe even some of that financing out to 10 years. Now, think about what happened. Financial crisis of 2008. We would have we wouldn't have skipped a beat. We would have made it right through the financial crisis without a problem at all. So that's step one. Fix the balance sheet prior to the financial crisis. Why didn't I do it? Because I didn't have a crystal ball. I didn't know the markets were going to collapse, making it virtually impossible to refinance that debt.
And you didn't have much runway following your entry into the business before the financial crisis happened, right?
No, it was very, very little runway. In fact, we first of all, the banks were on us when I joined. The first week I joined the company, they had violated a bank covenant. The banks were ready to shut Blockbuster down literally the first week I came. Yeah. So I was able to get them to kick the can down the road and extend our debt, forgiveness of that covenant violation into 2009. Not knowing that by 2009 I wouldn't have a bank market that I could get into. So number one, refinance the debt, fix the balance sheet first. We wouldn't have skipped a beat. Number two, we had an opportunity to acquire, when we acquired Movie Link from the studios, which is a video streaming entity. They had all of the new releases. So they had 3,000 titles of the newest movies already digitized. Huge advantage. Remember what Netflix had, DVDs by mail, and an aspiration to stream older movies. We had new releases, which was 80% of Blockbuster's business. That's what people wanted to see, is the new release. Remember the new release wall?
Oh, yeah.
That was 80% of our sales, right? Yeah. So we had a superior digital product opportunity. We also then were offered by Viacom, who was helping to partner with us to acquire 60% of all of the older titles exclusively. Exclusively. Now think about what that means.
Keyword. Wow. That's huge.
Exclusively. So that meant Netflix would still be doing DVDs by mail. I mean, literally, for $100 million, we could have locked in all of that old content. We already had access to the new content. This would have made us the aggregator, just like the stores, of old movies, new movies, TV shows, everything, right? Mm-hmm. Great opportunity. But it was $100 million investment. And the board looked at it and said, how soon will we be able to monetize this? Because at the time, Wi-Fi was a pretty poor experience in 2007. We had buffering. TVs weren't smart. The iPhone was just released. There weren't apps until the iPhone introduced them. The iPad didn't come out until 2009, so people weren't even convinced you were going to watch movies on that little screen on your phone, right? So the market wasn't ready for us to take on $100 million a year commitment without any idea of when that streaming capability would become viable. It turned out it didn't become really viable until around 2010. So we would have had $300 million already burned without any revenue from it. Now, in hindsight, yes, we should have done it.
Right.
Closed our eyes, made the investment, $100 million a year. We'll figure it out. We'll try to accelerate the streaming capability as best we can. That would have made Blockbuster the digital streaming source, basically.
Right. Change the course of history.
Change the course of history. That was the second. You ready for the third?
Yeah.
All right. So we also needed, because Blockbuster's not a technology company, let's face it, we needed a distribution partner who's going to help us make people aware of the Blockbuster app and the Blockbuster, online capability. Well, we were talking to Google, and we had a deal with Google. We had a definitive agreement with Google that nobody knows about because we had NDAs at the time. Mm-hmm. And that deal would have put us side by side with YouTube. YouTube, everything free.
Mhm.
Blockbuster, everything paid.
Ah,
I mean, could you have a better distribution partner than Google, right? For the Blockbuster brand. So you think about those three things. Refinance the company. Now we've got we've got debt, no debt obligation until many years down the road. Blockbuster was a cash flow machine, basically.
Yeah.
It had 90-day credit terms from the studio. So we weren't ever in any true liquidity crunch until the financial crisis occurred. So we had a good balance sheet. We would have exclusivity of digital content, and we would have had a distribution partner like Google. Now,
Man.
think
Wow.
about what that could have meant, and
Yeah.
what it would have meant for you as a customer is
Right.
instead of trying to hunt around and figure out who's got that, let me see, I want to watch the first Top Gun. Who's got that? Is that Hulu? Is it Netflix? Is it Amazon? I mean, it would be just like we did in the days of going to the store. I don't care. I'm going to go to the Blockbuster logo because they're going to have everything I want.
Yeah. Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm speechless right now.
Yeah, I know. That's the vision of Blockbuster that we were hoping for, we were trying for. Could we have been there? Yes. Should we have made some decisions differently? Yes.
But I can't begrudge that board, right, for not
Yeah.
wanting to make a $100 million commitment annually when the technology isn't there yet. You know it's going to happen, but when the heck's is it going to happen?
Yeah, these are difficult decisions. Now, do I kick myself every day for not being more aggressive with my board and saying, we got to do this. We have to do this. Yeah, I'll take that responsibility. But yeah, you can understand why people were reluctant, and I was reluctant. I didn't want to tank the company. Now, if I realized the markets were going to collapse in 2 years, I would have, by all means, I would have gone forward, because what we would have done if we faced bankruptcy eventually anyway, we would have restructured around that asset.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Shed the stores, reemerge as a digital company, and we would have been fine.
Yeah.
But none of us had a crystal ball. So, it's one of those things I can second guess myself. And I know people, when when you post this, there are going to be plenty of people out there. Oh yeah, he's the idiot that turned down Netflix, which was 7 years before I got the company, by the way. Right. So we'll draw a lot of those comments, but it's easy to second guess. It's always easy to
absolutely.
second guess,
And honestly, it's, to me, at least selfishly speaking, it's so much more valuable to talk to you than the guy that made it happen, because you can see how razor thin really the decision making is. It wasn't a bad decision or a series of bad decisions, right? Yeah, we can make mistakes, but there's not a mistake in this story, really.
Yeah.
Right. You made the best decision with the best information possible at the time.
That's exactly the key. Now, and let's compare that to Netflix, because people think, well, they're just, a storybook company. And I've got a lot of respect for Reed and the team that built Ted and all the folks at Netflix. They did a fabulous job, but there were several pivot points that they could have been crushed.
Yes.
If we had acquired that content, they had not yet made a play for exclusivity of that content. They could have, because they couldn't afford at the time either $100 million. But they could have, by passing on that opportunity and letting us do it, they could have been crushed.
Yeah.
They would have gone away. So that was one pivot point for them, that they were, I'll call it lucky, because we gave them a chance. A second pivot point was they were really under a lot of pressure because they had a bunch of old movies and people were tired of paying, for pretty stale content. And it was a very limited.
I remember those days.
I remember that. Yeah.
Their library wasn't very deep and it was very old. And so they were running into a wall, and they did make a bet. They bet $100 million. Now, it wasn't every year $100 million. Ironically, the same number. They bet $100 million on the creation of House of Cards.
Yep. I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
Now, no one was binge watching TV shows. They didn't know if that would work.
They could have created that phrase.
Yeah, it could have been a total bomb. I mean, if what happened to Kevin Spacey happened to Kevin Spacey 10 years earlier, you know,
Yeah.
Right.
it
Right.
could have gone south real fast, right?
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and I thought he was a great actor, but things happen, right? Well, they hit a massive home run with that, and what that gave them the confidence to do is then to double down on more and more content. But think about what they did. They shifted from a distribution company to a content creation company.
Yes.
That's really, really hard to do. Those are two very different business models,
Right.
but they
Exactly.
successfully pivoted, and they you know, kind of put the chips on black, let the wheel spin, and they won.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, you've got to give them credit. They were able to pivot, and they were successful. Could have gone the other way, and we'd be talking about Netflix, and people would be very judgmental if any one of those decisions went the wrong way.
Yeah.
People would say, "Oh, you could have been Blockbuster."
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I was in business school, either right when House of Cards came out or shortly thereafter. So it was all the buzz, right? And there was tons of debates on campus about, okay, clearly the show is a hit. However, can they keep this up? How do you scale up paying 100 million to create a show? Like the math doesn't work, right? Now they
Yeah.
eventually figured it out, but there was tremendous controversy and question about whether that was sustainable in terms of content creation with the massive cost of it and shifting to that from being a distribution company. And credit to them for figuring it out, but it was not an easy path.
No,
Because
no.
yeah,
And think of the content companies that have come and gone.
Right.
Content it's a creative process, and as with any creative process, you have winners and losers. But it is a very different game than distribution and technology enhanced distribution, which is really where they started. So they got into a content creation game. Even today, can they sustain it? I don't know. It'll be interesting.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I wouldn't bet
In
against them because they're
the
good.
graveyard of content creation companies, the first one that came to mind is I can't recall the name of the company, but Meg Whitman, right, founded that company that had short movies, like 3 5-minute movies, and they
Yep.
didn't make it.
Well,
Yeah.
think about Metro Goldman Mayer, right? MGM. They had this massive collection of movies, and they were creating new movies. And what happened? You know that,
Yeah.
but that the creative process it's pretty tricky.
Indeed. Yeah. Again, very fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. But you know, to wrap up the message of this whole thing, if people would just avoid perception and instead step back and really truly try to understand, look at perspective, look at all of the factors that are taken into consideration. What was going on in the macro environment at the time? What was going on with technology at the time? What was going on with competitors at the time? And you look at all of those things together, there is such richness in learning from perspective versus the illusions of perception that are caused by just looking at the surface, you know, 1 inch deep. Oh yeah, Netflix crushed Blockbuster, therefore, you know, Blockbuster didn't keep up with technology. You miss all the learning in that oversimplification of a perception.
You know, that's a pretty tidy segue into your book and your organization, Education is Freedom, right? Because you talk about you really don't just talk about, you really focus on emphasizing critical thinking as a real important pillar of educating oneself, right? Because it is so easy. I find myself falling into the trap every day of just consuming the superficial soundbite. But just a couple days ago, you know, I had a learning experience myself where I had a perception about a particular political candidate based on a short soundbite that generated a bunch of buzz a number of years ago, and made a conclusion about it. But then I just happened upon the transcript and read the whole thing, which was probably a 10-minute exchange with journalists, and realized that's not what they said at all.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
just a brief inflammatory soundbite taken out of context from a 10-minute conversation that really provided what the message of which was not at all
It's
consistent
skewed.
with that soundbite.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what happens. And unfortunately, society today, I like to compare where we are to 150 years ago, whenever it was that the modern printing press was invented.
Mm,
People will say, why is everybody so worked up today? And it's not just in the United States, all over the world. Like, people, there's all this, division and controversy and tension and anger. And what's causing all that? And you think about it, we haven't had an explosion of information like we've had in the last 10 years with the internet since the
mhm,
invention of the printing press. And you question, would the American Revolution ever happen if we hadn't been able to use a printing press to distribute leaflets and tell people that we were being taxed unfairly? I mean,
mm,
would that have ever happened with word of mouth traveling to the remote corners of the 13 states? But the ability to put out these, printed documents that made it now real, created a reinforcement of the perception anyway, whether it was reality or not. It got people angry and stirred up. And I think we're in that space right now where all of a sudden people are getting this massive influx of information. It's being curated to what they might want to hear,
mhm.
and it's triggering these perceptions. And I use a thing in the book, you might have seen the cycle, the negativity cycle, where perceptions and misunderstanding, call it ignorance, if you will, ignorance of the truth, can lead to perceptions, lead to anger, lead to hatred, lead to violence. And
Mm,
it can be a pretty negative cycle that you get yourself into, where every day you're getting this fire hose of perception that may not be true, but you're getting madder and madder and madder to the point that you're ready to, go to war. And
Yeah.
step back from that and think about the ability to use knowledge and critical thinking
yeah.
to, instead of being influenced by perception, you have a different perspective now, and you're able to look at both sides of an argument, make a more informed decision. And rather than react with anger and get led into a pattern of hatred or violence, instead, you're able to use knowledge and understanding, understand the situation better, and create hope, because with understanding, you can always argue the other side
Yeah.
in a constructive way. And
Yeah.
then that leads to a cycle of hope and peace, which is a far better solution for humanity than blowing each other up with tanks and missiles, I think.
Right. Pedro, I think you're a Star Wars fan, right? That reminds me, what Jim
Yeah.
just said reminds me of Yoda's quote, right?
Yeah.
Which you provided the original source, Jim, in the book. I believe it was an Arabic scholar or a Middle Eastern.
Andalusian. Yeah. Enid Rushd.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's hard to say the name. I had to learn how to say the name.
Yeah.
Enid Rushd. But Yoda quoted him in Star Wars.
Right.
Yeah. Due diligence, right? It doesn't matter what you're doing. With Think Beyond Stocks, is all about educating the audience about alternative investments, right? And before you make that investment, like what you should know about. And due diligence is really important. It doesn't matter if it's investing. It doesn't matter if you're going to make a decision on taking your kids to the next jiu-jitsu school, which one you're going to go to, right? It's just really taking your time and really pay attention to everything in that ecosystem, right? And it is true. A lot, I've seen a lot of people, just past week, I saw it on Facebook that people were talking about, I invested on this group, they show this persona online and, they look like they were sharp and everything. And then they haven't been paid, right? The dividends. So, and it does happen. Just because you've
Yeah.
seen someone online, it doesn't matter. Still do your due diligence. When I was in the military, my sergeant used to tell us, check and recheck,
Yep.
every time you got on a mission, because you want to make sure you got everything covered, because you never know what can happen. So
Yeah, it's so true.
yeah.
Where I learned, I learned, ironically, from my Japanese licensees the importance of continuous improvement cycle, right? Kaizen and all that
Kaizen.
stuff. And ironically, it came from an American. Edward Deming was in post Reconstruction, during Reconstruction of Japan, post World War II, was teaching business to the Japanese leadership, and he taught this process of they've simplified it down. When they were reteaching me our own concept, basically, they said, well, why don't you do plan, do, see? And I said, what? And they said, plan, do, see. And what they were quoting basically was Edward Deming's advice to them, which ironically, as I stepped back from it and looked at what the heck does that mean? It was the scientific method. It was what we learned in grade school. And it was the heart of critical thinking, which is have a hypothesis and then take an action. We did this in chemistry lab. Right. And then step back and assess the result and use data to then come back to the hypothesis and say, was I right or wrong? And how do I modify that for a better result? Mm-hmm. And think about how simple that is, right? And if you apply that to business, any business decision, you've got a hypothesis about what's going to happen. You put an action in place. And here's where we drop the ball 90% of the time. Do we really measure it and then go back and modify our hypothesis?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, man.
We get lazy. We go, no. And we got another hypothesis. we just keep doing it over and over again. And while there's nothing wrong with that trial and error process, it's very different than the method, than the methodical discipline to go through, use data to then modify your original hypothesis and keep making small improvements so that you get to a better outcome. And ironically, that same critical thinking process can apply to our decision about who to vote for. Right. You see a soundbite and you go, okay, and then you have a hypothesis. They're the one I need to vote for. do you really then get the data and do your homework, as you said? Mm-hmm. Do you look at the whole transcript of what was said rather than the soundbite, and then modify your hypothesis accordingly?
I think a lot of people, I'm seeing this instant gratification, right? That's kind of what people are looking for, and never want to make that pivot and say, all right, let's take this information and take our time, so to speak, right, and continue working on it. So
it's shortcuts. We're an instant gratification society. We want to, just take the shortcut. They said it, so it's right. Well,
yeah.
All right. Well, I really want to get into again this book, everybody. Education is Freedom. Where can this book be found, by the way, before we jump into it?
Yeah, it's I've got it online, educationisfreedombook.com. You can go there and find links to buy the book. Or jameswkeys.com is my website. You're certainly able to find it there. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the basic book sites. And what I hope people will do, candidly, is decide to give the book. In fact, if anybody wants to order 10 or more books and they reach back out to me via my website or my email, I'll send you a free copy of it, signed copy, because my hope is this doesn't just end up on someone's shelf. And the signed copy, but I hope people will decide that there are others in their life that really can benefit from this roadmap of how to use learning, what to learn, how to learn, why to learn, how to use that to accelerate your career.
All right, great. So the book can be found basically wherever books are sold, including your websites, educationisfreedombook.com and jameswkeys.com. That's Keyes. So everybody check that out. So let's get into it. And actually, let me add, the book is kind of a combination of biographical bits and pieces from your own life personally, as well as a person in business. And it's also kind of a self-help book. It's very much a motivational book, that's for sure. And then it has a lot of tactics and strategies about, all right, how should I think? How should I educate myself. So it's a lot of things in one, in my opinion. But here's the first question I have for you, Jim, is
Sure.
what are the top things that we as Americans need to do to really leverage education?
First of all, it's a very personal thing. I think we need to own our own learning. The subtitle of the book is "The Future is in Your Hands," and I meant that literally for each of us to say, you know what? Stop blaming the public school system. Stop blaming the colleges, what they're teaching, et cetera, et cetera. Each of us as an individual is responsible for our own future. And if learning is the key, there's no excuse today. I'm sitting here, it's in my hands. This is a portal to unlimited learning. I mean, come on, versus the way my generation grew up with a set of borrowed encyclopedias or going to the library. So access is there. That's my number one message. And then stepping back from that, there are so many individuals that do need help because they don't have perhaps the personal motivation. Maybe they don't have the confidence to succeed. So I'm on a bit of a mission to say our public education system in the United States especially was built for a different purpose. It was built back 100 plus years ago by the Rockefellers and others to mass produce an educated workforce for the factories. So if you wonder why we've got what we've got, it's because that's what it was built for. And today we need a different kind of education. But what we haven't yet done is harness the power of technology to increase engagement. That's what learning is all about, engaging students. You used to be able to engage a kid with an encyclopedia with all these cool pictures of things they'd never seen before. Well, now we can take that same engagement level and dial it up and take a kid. If you're interested in medicine, we'll take you right into the operating room at Mass General Hospital or UT Southwestern. We can do these things, but we haven't yet built the infrastructure necessary. Call it the Internet of Education, that platform from which every kid in the United States has access to, that will give them unlimited learning. And then if we want to add on to that with higher quality and, commercial opportunities on top of that, we can. But that base level of public access education that doesn't yet exist in the United States, and that's I'm kind of on a mission to help build that.
Now, do you think what would be the mechanism to catalyze that? Would it start in the public school system? Would it be in private education, charter schools? How do you envision that?
Yes. So here's the challenge. All of the things that are going on in the school system, state charter schools, private schools, they're doing some really great things. Even some public schools are doing some great things. I'm a scale guy. 7-Eleven has 80,000 stores across the planet, right? There's no mom and pop that can ever compete with 7-Eleven straight up, because if we're going to invest in AI to improve the way we're able to satisfy our customers, anticipating their needs, right? I can amortize that over 80,000 stores if I've got 7-Eleven. Now, think of public schools in the same way. There's no private school with 50 kids, 100 kids, 1,000 kids that could ever afford the per head investment in technology that we can do if we invest across millions and millions of kids, right? And so my argument is everybody wants to push school down to the local, state and local level, and especially local level. And by all means, we should do a lot of that, but we shouldn't forget the importance of scale, especially when it comes to using technology and providing those local schools at every level the best possible platform to increase engagement in the classroom. And that's what I'm saying is it takes leadership on a national level. It takes leaders who don't just take the easy path and say, we're going to get rid of the Department of Education. That's a simple, it sounds good.
Soundbite, right? Yeah.
It's a good soundbite. And everybody goes, yeah, I hate those guys. How about repurposing the Department of Education and then pulling together the leaders of the best technology companies in the world that are right here in the United States and saying, all right, you guys are going to be the task force. We're going to ask you, the federal government, to work together to build this platform of an open source system like the internet, if you will, just as an analogy, to provide absolute access to every young person anywhere in this country. And then from there, we're going to let you build on top of it other apps, if you will, that will enhance that education. But there's a basic level of high quality education access that we will provide that will light up every classroom in this country. Because think about it, we can provide the best algebra teacher in the country and drop them into every classroom in America and let the teacher then be a curator for that instruction and answer questions and help them. We can take every classroom and provide virtual reality access to operating rooms, to boardrooms, to real world experiences that they can now see and experience. Instead of taking a field trip, to some local factory, we can actually take them anywhere in the world. When they're learning French, we can connect with a French classroom and have them talk to their peers back and forth. There's just unlimited possibilities to light up levels of engagement through technology that won't happen on a state and local level or an individual charter school level because we'll never have the money to do it properly.
Got it. Peter, you've got kids in school. What do you think, man?
No, I think it's amazing. I mean, just I know it's not the same, but the technology what they have in Vegas, even here in Dallas, the Sphere, right? You can see sports games, right in front of you, like you're like in the actual game. So, I think augmented reality can definitely be a way to learn about engineering or the body physiology, biology, right? Everything. The technology is there already. So I definitely agree with you. Yeah.
It is. Imagine, if you will, and this is going to be a few years down the road, but the technology is coming. There's a company here in Dallas that does small LED panels that can be pieced together and they could cover the walls of a classroom. Imagine having the capabilities of the Sphere in every classroom in America. I mean, what kid wouldn't want to go to school every day and say, all right, where are we going to go today? Hey, today we're going to have at 10 o'clock, we're going to beam us up to the space station. And we're going to talk to the astronauts. We're going to talk to Suni Williams, the current commander of the space station. And she's going to teach us about all the experiments she's doing and show us. And we're going to see it like in full reality vision surrounding us as if we were actually there with her. What kid wouldn't get excited about learning with that kind of experience? This is possible. We've changed every industry in the United States, in the world, with the power of technology. We have not yet brought it into the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Really profound and 100% correct. Yeah. Why hasn't it changed?
Leadership.
Yeah.
It takes leadership. It takes vision, and it will. The question is, are we going to wait 100 years for this to happen? Or do we get excited about it today and go, why don't we lead? Let's lead. Let's let AI take away the stigma that people have with learning disabilities by allowing AI to modify the way instructions being delivered, given to the way the student is learning.
Oh man, I love that.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. Yeah. If you had dyslexia 50 years ago, you were well, yeah, and it happens. And today, there's a way to fix that. You just learn in a different fashion. You didn't fit the mode of the standardized classroom. I mean, we were pumping out students the way we pumped out Model Ts.
Right.
As long as they fit that conformity of standardization, they were fine. 1 inch outside the bell curve and you're toast.
Right.
But technology can fix that because we learn differently. Why not adopt it immediately?
Yeah.
Wow.
Amazing.
Love this mission, man. Yeah.
Well, and here's why it's so important. We taught the rest of the world the power of knowledge, the power of education. And since 2012, the Chinese, as an example, have doubled down on the importance and the power of knowledge and learning.
Mhm.
And their college graduation rates have gone from 40 to almost 60%. In that same period of time, the United States has gone backwards from high 50s to low 40s.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean for our global competitiveness in 30, 40, 50 years if we don't invest today? I've been characterizing it to my peers in the business community as a supply and demand opportunity.
Mhm.
You know, we're worried about chip production. We build factories, chip factories. Well, we should be worried about the production of the human resource here in America. And let's
Mhm.
double down on the importance of education.
Yeah. Wow. I couldn't agree more on especially on the rate of students advancing into college, which I've come across those numbers as well here in our country, and it is declining. And I think a large part of it is people are questioning the value of a university education. Why? Because it costs so darn much. So then you have to ask the question, why does it cost so much? And I believe it's because of how we finance it, right? When I went to business school, I was shocked because I got the federal loan application, and there's no credit check. First of all, it doesn't matter whether I'm getting a master's degree in ceramics or an MBA. So my earning potential doesn't matter. I'm going to get the same rate as anybody else. And it also asked me, how much do you want? That blew me away. So I actually did some math and said, okay, what's the least I can borrow? And that's what I did. But that's not what a lot of my colleagues did. They're going to get as much as they can. So, if you allow free access to capital that's not based on any sort of underwriting, what's it going to do? It's going to inflate the cost of education, obviously.
Yeah, and a lot of that, though, we have to be careful because, again, perceptions creep in, and it's easy to have a perception that college is more expensive today. You just look at the numbers, they're staggering. You look at the debt, it seems staggering. But if you really, again, use critical thinking and go back and do the math, you'll find that when I graduated, college tuition, room and board was about $10,000 at my school. Today, it's $60,000, $70,000. Now, here's something that people aren't doing. On an inflated basis, in today's dollars, it would have been $60,000 back then.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you just do the math, just look at what was the value of the dollar today's dollar in 1980, and do the math. You'll be surprised that it's not as expensive as it seems. The price of everything's gone up.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the price of a car, you'd say, who can afford $100,000 car? We're talking $5,000 back then, $10,000 for a car, right? So that's one factor. But the other thing that is never, ever publicized is the massive increase in giving and endowments here in the United States. So these colleges, my little humble school in Massachusetts, went from zero endowment to $1 billion today. They're on a mission. Their discount rate today, and this is something that you learn when you sit on a board of a university, but it's not publicized. The discount rate is 47%.
Wow.
So that means the tuition isn't really $70,000, $80,000. It's maybe 50, which would put it actually less on an inflated basis. Now, if you're a very wealthy family, are you going to pay the full boat? If you come from another country and you're going to go to school here, are you likely to pay the full boat? Yeah. But if you have need, there's a pretty good chance you'll get a much reduced rate. So what I'm up against and trying to help people explain is, again, don't let the perceptions cause you to change your whole career trajectory, life trajectory, and choose not to go to school because you think you can't afford it. And the irony is that kid that's an underprivileged kid that is successful in high school is probably going to get potentially a free boat at some of the best universities in the country if they apply. But many of them may not even apply because the fear that they would never be able to afford it.
Yeah.
This brings it full circle back to one of the first things we discussed, right? Limiting beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it's 70 grand a year. Why would I even apply? Well, they're not aware of the financial aid that's available to them.
Yeah. It's huge today. The amount of companies giving scholarships, just the access to cash. But it's hard. You've got to apply. You've got to have the diligence and belief in yourself that I can do this. I'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The simple answer, the dumbed down answer is college is not for everybody. And that makes me very sad to hear, because if I heard that as a kid, I would have said, yep, see, they're right. It's not for me. And where would I be today? So the way I've been rephrasing it is, it's true. College is not for everybody, but opportunity is, and college is such a big part of unlocking opportunity for most of us.
Yes.
For most of us.
Yes. Agreed. All right. Well, this has been a phenomenal discussion, Jim. Yeah. Thank you very much. You've added a tremendous amount of value to me personally. I'm sure to Pedro, right?
Yeah.
And to our listeners. So thank you very much. Again, everybody, buy this book. It's amazing. Education is Freedom, available anywhere books are sold and on Jim's websites. And we'll provide that information in the notes as well. So Pedro, closing remarks.
So all I got to say is this has been an amazing podcast interview with you, and the knowledge that you have, the things that you're trying to do, the mission that you have with education is, for me, is really important, coming from, unprivileged, and I had to use education. I joined the military to get to education. But it definitely has changed the trajectory of my career. And for those that are listening to this, definitely get the book. I recommend it. And one thing that I know that a lot of folks that are listening to this have this issue, which is limiting beliefs. And so definitely don't put yourself in that box. So definitely, and Mr. Keys, thank you so much. Is anything that you want to share before we close out?
Well, Pedro, thanks. I know you've got to rush home and help your kids fill out their Harvard application, because you're
Yes.
I want to leave you with this, that on the cover of the book, I put the Earth on purpose. I mentioned a couple times I was inspired by the Apollo astronauts, and I never in my wildest expectation would have thought that I'd grow up one day and I'd be able to call them friends. But Buzz Aldrin's a personal friend. Charlie Duke, a lunar module pilot for Apollo 16, is flown in my airplanes, my co-pilot. And when I'm flying, and I got to fly to NASA with him and land on the shuttle strip and things like that, fly into zero gravity. Yeah, we did a promo for the book in zero gravity. But those are the kinds of things that are possible if you learn what I learned from the astronauts, because when they leave the Earth and they look back, they call it the overview effect, or the world view. I call it perspective. Because when you look at the Earth from this perspective, you don't see wars, you don't see races, you don't see petty issues. You see a beautiful planet laid out before you with unlimited possibilities. If you transport back to sea level, that's when you get mired in perception. And that perception can cause you to get angry and to revert back from your astronaut brain, as I talk about in the book, to your caveman brain that reacts and gets angry and responds to stimulus. So my message with the book, even if you don't buy it, is recognize the difference between perspective, which requires critical thinking, and for us to take a broader look at the world and at problems and at people, and to step back and always remind yourself that perspective is what allows you to respond with your prefrontal cortex as a more advanced form of the human race, than to revert back to perceptions that make us mad and ready to fight each other and disagree over everything. So that's the message with the book, that perspective will be your best friend in using knowledge to eliminate fear, and success then is unlimited.
All right. Wow. Thank you so much for those closing thoughts, and thank you for joining us here on Think Beyond Stocks.
was certainly beyond stocks. We thought a little bit beyond stocks.
Well beyond.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Appreciate the
Thank
opportunity.
Thank you so much. And guys, if you're watching this, make sure you share this video. Thank you. Till next time. Take care.